Welcome to the first episode of Walk Talk. This is part one of a two-part series going over the most important aspects for overcoming chronic pain. So part one is the psychology of pain. I'm going to be discussing my own experiences as well as some academic research and other resources in this space to help someone going through a similar thing that I also went through. Everything will be linked below. Otherwise, throughout the talk, I'll be showing some things on the screen. However, the series is designed for just listening while walking. This long format sort of series was really beneficial to me. I found the longer I went into the injury, I was more open to listening to long format content, and I found the most benefit from it. So that's why I've picked to do this in podcast formation. I also have some notes up because this is my first episode and I don't want to veer off too much. It's more of a script actually, but besides the point. Just if I sound a little reedy, that is why. Okay, so without delving too much into depth and going off topic, I herniated my L5-S1 disc in June of 2023. I had about 6 months before I started seeing any improvement, and probably 18 until I was completely pain-free and able to do daily life tasks comfortably again. Unfortunately, I re-injured myself a few months into last year, but that's when I really started delving deeper into both the psychology and the physiology of my injury, and not just finding a short-term fix, but a path where I'm not just able to be someone who is pain-free but limited, but the active, sporty, capable person I was pre-injury. And at 23, I just wasn't going to give that up. And I think from what I've learned and practiced, I can see a road where it's possible. And I think the same is true for people much older than me that also had this injury. The reason I'm starting with the psychology is because I believe it's more misunderstood than the physical rehab side of the injury. A lot of people go to physios, chiros, osteos, etc., and sometimes get the proper conservative treatment that at least leads to some improvement, but maybe not go to anybody that can give them the proper understanding of persistent pain psychology fundamentals. And also, it's purely information based, so you don't have to commodify it, you don't have to put it into a pill or buy thousands of dollars of gym equipment or need a professional to help you with the right form. It's just completely down to knowledge that can make an enormous impact without having to do a whole lot else. So I think that's why it's really valuable to get on top of this side of the injury. The final reason is because I think it can be nuanced and taken the wrong way. But the core principle of today is that pain can continue even when there's no longer structural damage to the body. Now, the reason I think it's nuanced is because it doesn't translate to just it's all in your head, but more towards reframing and understanding what's occurring in your brain, and that's allowing you to question certain sensations in the body and push limitations with a lesser fear of injury. I first came across this principle on a TED Talk by a neuroscientist from Australia named Lorimer Moseley. I'll insert a clip from that talk to add some context to pain psychology.
This is the problem, that if we keep running the neurons, the brain cells that produce pain, they get better at producing pain. They become more and more sensitive, so we need a smaller and smaller influence. The illusion, if you like, in increasing sensitivity becomes very unhelpful. It's trying to protect you from something that's not needing protection. It's very real. The other thing that happens is that all of these networks lose their capacity to be specific and precise. So the pain spreads. The pain changes its quality. Ultimately, it's not even informative. It's both unhelpful and uninformative.
As a neuroscientist, and if you watch the TED Talk in full, he goes through a lot of experiments and trials that support this theory around pain being an illusion to a sense. And one of the experiments in that talk is where he's talking about how he took a sample group of people and touched them with a piece of metal. Now, half of them were looking at a red circle when he touched them, and the other half were looking at a blue circle. And when asked what the temperature was of the metal, the ones with the red predominantly said hot, while the ones with the blue predominantly said cold. And this is an example of how our brain can misinterpret stimulus through past knowledge and our experiences that came before. So he published a book in 2003 called Explain Pain with physiotherapist David Butler, with the most recent updated version in 2013. I read the first edition just through my free local library online, and I would definitely recommend a lot of the things I'll go through today, explanations from that book. From my research, it's probably the best pain psychology book that I've read, so I would definitely recommend it. But if you can't get a hold of it, there's also a free journal link that I'll put below that Lorimer co-authored in 2023. So it's more up to date, but it's definitely not as digestible as the patient-orientated book. It's more of a research paper. Nonetheless, and just a disclaimer, I have no affiliations with these people. These are just resources that help me, so I'm just sharing them to help you also, hopefully. So I'm actually going to talk about something from the article, which is the fit for purpose model for chronic low back pain. And this is essentially just a cognitive look at how people with low back pain can start looking at themselves to create that chronic pain that can often cement itself in there long after the tissue damage is past. Stage 1 is your genuine acute tissue injury, such as a disc herniation. You explain to both professionals and your family the often severe tissue damage. You get images such as MRIs that start to reinforce this, and you get rigid explanations from health professionals. And this cognitively translates into stage 2, which is the formation in the mind that the back is damaged, fragile, unhealthy, it's untrusted, and it's no longer fit for purpose. It's always under threat, and therefore it's always needed protection. This causes the loop to begin, which is increased protective motor responses, less variety in movement, added stress when reading distressing material about the worst case possibilities, and that's when the deconditioning of the musculoskeletal system begins, as do the changes in the central nervous system processing. Now your back actually structurally does tolerate less load, even if the tissue is healed. There's less spinal control, the sensory systems get better at reinforcing unhealthy body images, and less effective at enforcing a healthy image. Now it's been months, years, you're extremely stiff, you move like a robot, anything that deviates from normal in your day can cause a flare-up, and you live in constant fear of making the pain any worse. I know this because I was in it, and I'm continuing still to work through this to this day now. But I think this is a good point to reiterate that hearing this does not result in the solution being, it's all psychological, therefore you should just push through it. It's more nuanced than that. In fact, often the worst type of things myself and a lot of people hear when they walk through the doors of these professionals are things like, you're young, keep pushing through because there's nothing to worry about. And your body will just kind of magically heal itself. Or like, just avoid what can sometimes cause any sort of flare-ups or injury. Just avoid those sorts of movements. And these are just blanket terms. And if you're not careful in applying the knowledge that I've spoken about before, and you just stick to stuff like this, then you're likely just going to end up causing more tissue damage to the body. For an example of this, I'm going to bring up the Low Back Ability podcast, which I'm going to go into more detail on in the next part because I think it's a great source of information on the physiological side of things. But there was a guest on there not too long ago who had a disc herniation, and this is no shade at him because he was following the advice of professionals, people that were accredited, surgeons, physios, doctors. But often he clearly had severe tissue damage and severe symptoms, numbness, tingling, severe pain, things that need to be taken seriously and handled seriously, and was consistently sort of told, push through this, you'll be okay, work through this. And this resulted in needing a spinal surgery. And he was going over activities and things that he was doing that I couldn't even imagine doing in my most severe times, which were not as symptomatically as severe as the things he was talking about. So just hearing it was making kind of my skin crawl a little bit. But the point I'm saying is he ended up needing a spinal surgery because he had severe numbness and loss of bladder control, which is where surgery often is needed to step in to prevent any more permanent damage to the body. That's an example of taking the advice of what should be medical professionals saying the right things so that people can get better. But unfortunately, in that case, that was not the right thing. And it's why the takeaway being just pain is in the mind is definitely not the takeaway of the video, but more so to have a nuanced look at pain psychology and where you might be having hypersensitive, inaccurate pain in the body long after tissue damage and while doing the right things in the gym and in your daily lifestyle. But on the other side of that, it becomes extremely normal for this fit for purpose model I just mentioned to occur. I know because I've been in the depths of it and I'm still working on that. And yeah, it was pretty much that loop. It was trying the conservative method and trying to listen to the professionals around me, feeling like that wasn't really working, and then responding to that by protecting myself, moving like a robot, not sitting down for too long, not standing up for too long, not doing anything for too long. All things that over a long period of time impact the body in a chronic way to where it manifests a layer of protectiveness that sustains itself long after it's actually necessary. I also was pretty much like a hypochondriac all through childhood. And I guess when I finally did have a more severe injury, that sort of like masked its head a little bit. I also had just a minimal understanding of the role of the mind and the body, which led to, like I said, pushing too much at the start, not seeing a response, and then overprotecting myself. And still to this day, like when I'm picking stuff off the ground, I'll go with like the one sort of leg. Like I definitely move in a way where it wouldn't take too long to pick up that I have a back injury. I still use like back supports. I still do limit myself in a lot of different ways. And that is not what I'm actually saying is a bad thing, but I'm just saying that it is important to be conscious of those things, because slowly building and building, both psychologically and physiologically, proving to yourself that you and the human body itself can do a lot more and has a lot larger of a potential than what the last, maybe in my case, 2-3 years have shown anyway. For example, you may be physically capable of walking 5 kilometers. Now, this is the case for someone who isn't even injured. Now, you may be confident or unconfident in your ability to walk 5 kilometers. Let's say an uninjured person who maybe had some health struggles in the past is not really sure if they're able to walk 5 kilometers. Well, if they go outside and they decide one day that they're going to try to walk 5 kilometers and they succeed, psychologically that's going to change to where they can now think that they can because they have. And the parallel to an injury is getting into the gym, moving in the right way. For example, let's just say you're at the stage where you're now deadlifting 20 kilos after a back injury. The next time you're at work and somebody asks you to pick up something that's 10 kilograms off the floor, you're going to feel confident that you can do it because you've done the evidence in the gym by picking up 20 kilos. Now, if you weren't working in the gym, even if you were structurally capable of picking up those 10 kilos, you may not have believed it, and you may have gone to pick it up at work and found yourself really worried, psychologically going back into those loops, and therefore flaring yourself up, inflaming the tissue in your body, feeling all these things that you were feeling in the past, despite actually being able to do it. It's not just in the gym, it's walking, it's moving, it's doing sports again. All of these things build up the evidence and the confidence that you're able to move without being overly conscious of moving. And that comes from being conscious in the gym and putting in that work there. But outside of that, it also comes from whatever form of mindfulness is necessary to reorientate yourself into reminding yourself that the body is healthy, the body is oversensitive, and the body can be inaccurate in how I feel pain. That can come through meditation, that can come through checking yourself. Often I check myself in the sense where, for example, this is the first episode of the podcast and I've been talking and not really thinking that much about how much I've been sitting down. And I normally have my desk in a stand-up position, but it just works better with the microphone that I sit down. Now, sometimes I get up and I'm like, my back feels a little bit sore. That's because I don't really do it that much. But I also have to check myself and think, hold on a minute. Yesterday I was at the gym. I did a 2-minute back iso hold amongst a bunch of other exercises. I also went for a swim. I went for a walk this morning. I went for a walk yesterday. I worked. Physically, I've proven to myself that I am likely capable of sitting down for 15 to 20 minutes and being able to not worry about flaring my back up from sitting down. Now, sometimes without actually going through that mental process yourself, you can just subconsciously manifest that this activity here is something that should cause pain, because for years before that, it did cause pain. And without, first of all, having the knowledge that this is taking place in your mind, then you can't fix it. So therefore, having the knowledge is the first step, but then also putting it into practice by consistently reminding yourself that what you're feeling may not be a representation of tissue damage in your body. It can make a massive difference in the way that you see your pain and the way that it can change over time. Meditation is also a thing that I try and do at least once a week. And I'm not very good at it, admittedly. I probably only do it for like 5 or 10 minutes, sometimes with stimulus, sometimes without. I'll link my meditation app below because I swapped from Insight Timer because it was just fucking bloatware at that point. Like, it's just had so many ads, asked me so many questions, and I just found a timer that is literally just a timer. So obviously it just has the little gong, so you don't have to play your alarm on your clock and it you fucking hit the deck because there's a blaring alarm playing. There's probably a soothing one, but I like having the meditation app. I don't even think I had to log in. I love apps that you don't have to log in for, so I'll link that below, as well as a video that I used to watch a lot when I was in a lot of both chronic and acute pain, which is also about sitting with your pain, which is enormously important. Now, I don't have a lot of academic research, but I could probably... I'll see if I can find some and link it below, but it's just a technique that really works for me. And it's just sitting with it. Sitting with your pain, being present with it, and sometimes just watching how it can sort of evolve and sometimes even disappear when you're not trying to get rid of it so much. And again, it just comes down to what can happen in the body when we're actually paying attention to it and we're thinking from a more logical, rational perspective and breaking some of those pain loop cycles that have been occurring for so many years in the brain. So I'll link that video below as well that really helped me, but it's really just about sitting with the pain and the experiment of trying to see the pain as a sensation and not a direct enemy. And I think that really helped me in the sense where reframing the idea of pain in the body was big for me, where I was looking at it beforehand as something that was trying to come after me. And obviously it can be extremely natural to do so, but at the end of the day, it's a protection method from the body. It's a response from the brain, but it's also something that even when it's misfiring, it's still trying to do a job, and sort of making amends with that and not just feeling that frustration bubble up every time you're in this pain that you may not understand or may not feel like you deserve feeling. Fighting it and fighting it and fighting it can often just sort of exacerbate it. So reframing the idea around pain, sort of becoming friends with pain. In one of the low back ability podcasts, he used the analogy that pain is like this thing that knocks on your door, even when, it's no longer needed anymore. And if you ignore it, it just comes back with a fucking megaphone. And that's exactly how it feels, where both physically and psychologically, it does have to be addressed. And ignoring it is only going to make it worse. But having the tools and the knowledge to do so tends to be, or in my experience, has been the key to improving not only my life physically, but also mentally. But even with the knowledge, it really is about putting it into practice. And that's because the chronic pain becomes such a normality, as we've spoken about with the research backing this, that we feel these things long after the tissue damage is done. And that's why it really does come down to consistently psychologically checking yourself and also consistently physically checking yourself, like I've already spoken about. Where personally for me, if you're anything like me, subconsciously, you don't even realize how often what you're going through impacts your day. How many times you bend down in a particular way. How many times you sit on a bed with a pillow under your legs. How many times you avoid maybe certain chairs that look a little too soft, or stick a back support under, say, your car seat. Anything like that, where when it adds up, there's hundreds of things a day that you do to avoid a particular position or a particular postural situation because of that deep-rooted fear of not trusting your back. And trusting your back comes in the gym, and it also comes in the mind. And what you associate these things to do. I don't know how to word that, but when I mean associate things to do, I've had to change my relationship with the gym. Now, I think the reason being is because so often when we go to the gym, that is the area where we're physically testing our strengths. And we're doing so because we're in the safest environment possible, right? Because if you're at the gym and you're doing a 2-minute back iso hold, that is where you want to test your strength. You're like, okay, I'm flared up from this. This is where I'm at, obviously, physically. I need to regress it. Or I did this really easily, so I can progress it. And that is a much better way of going through things than not doing that. Going to work, picking up boxes, or moving very actively, getting home, feeling flared up, feeling like you don't particularly know what's caused it, but clearly you've done too much of something. It's a mystery. You haven't been able to train it. You haven't been able to really figure out where you're at. And then you get into this thing of like, I guess that feeling of life is obviously too physically demanding for what I am capable of. And then that's where I guess the deep sort of entrenchment comes of how you think about yourself and how you think about your back. And I say all that to say that the gym, I have to constantly remind myself when I go to the gym, this is a safe environment. I am willing to test my limits, and with testing my limits comes from the possibility of leaving, sometimes short term, not feeling great, but long term, bouncing back and feeling like, okay, this is all right. And then maybe not over a week being like, okay, I've made a lot of progress. Maybe not over a month feeling like I've made a lot of progress, but over months and months and months, even stacking up to years, all of a sudden you look back and you're like, okay, like I've done a shit ton of activities. And sometimes you even have the realization when you're talking to people and you're like, hold on, there are activities that I do at the gym, certain mobility things that people with quote unquote normal backs would really struggle to do. And that kind of puts it into perspective where you're like, maybe I'm not as injured or broken or deserving of this pain than I think when I get up in the morning and there's a bit of sciatica running down my leg, maybe I'll second guess it because I'm like, hold on, this bed or this sleeping arrangement, I know I can structurally handle this because I've done a lot more activity in the last few months to prove that my back is a lot stronger than what I maybe give it credit for, or maybe what it was at in the past. And what I've recently been doing in the new year, so nearly 2 months now, and I'm staring at it now, is just color coding my activities on a monthly calendar. Now I have a Google Sheet that just has a bunch of the activities that I actually do in detail, and that's purely there to track it. But I keep the monthly thing so that every time I look over during my month, I can actually see all of the different colors, and that helps me mentally go, look at all the things that I'm doing for myself. And it makes a big difference. And it's also, when you take it off and you stack it up, even over 2 months, I have 4 different colors. One for walking, one for the gym with no back ISO, one for the gym with back ISO, and then one for swimming and the recovery pools that I sometimes go to. Now, when I look over that, over even just 2 months, I realize, wow, like I've probably walked 20 times per month. Maybe not, maybe 15 times per month, every second day. I've trained 3 times a week for 2 months, and I've done plenty of back ISOs, and all these things, they mentally make a huge difference over time. They're just chipping away where it's like, okay, I can do this. I can do that. And then all of a sudden, you look back 6 months ago and you go, wow, this is a lot different to how I viewed myself and how I viewed my back. And that's the beauty of it. It really does naturally go hand in hand, the psychology and the physiology, which is why it's really important to physically push yourself. But I think just the way my brain works, the way I think about myself, sometimes pessimistically, I really have to make sure that even while I'm doing all those things, I'm consistently checking myself and being like, what am I subconsciously thinking about, like the structure of myself and how much I'm capable of doing? And am I just feeling whatever I'm feeling right now because I genuinely don't believe that I can't feel pain? Which sounds so strange to someone that may not be in it, but there is just a couple of times where I'm like, I feel like my low back's been really good, and all of a sudden my neck and shoulders are a little bit achy. Or my neck and shoulders are a little bit achy, and all of a sudden my back feels pretty good. And at some point you have to question, maybe you have a really sensitive body, hypersensitive, based on the protective structures that you've built over a long period of time, which at one point, especially in the acute phase, served a purpose, but are now maybe inhibiting the growth and the progress. And sometimes just consistently reminding yourself of that, and you have that sort of moment where you're like, I'm much more active and capable. And it doesn't look like immediately going from walk to run or swim to dive or, stretch to lift, whatever it is. It's not about a big jump, but it's about just thinking next time you're doing something, putting it into actual perspective of like, what does the history show of my capabilities? I see through the gym, through all the times that I would sit with myself and think about these things, that maybe I'm a lot more capable than I'm giving myself and my back credit for. Now, as I've said, first step, D1 yapper, sometimes find it difficult to put all my thoughts together in my head while I'm talking into a microphone, but I'm hoping I'm going to get better at that. But I've just summarized pretty much this episode, and I'm going to go through that now. So the main takeaway is that there is credible research that chronic low back pain can be present after tissue damage and present itself as a hypersensitive and overprotective nervous system and body. Part of the improvement strategy comes from implementing this knowledge into your daily life, alongside the optimal physical activity. My psychological tips that work for me: number 1, read and learn the psychological research that shows how catastrophizing and reinforcing your pain can create or sustain a chronic pain loop, and try and work towards changing the way you view pain, both consciously and subconsciously. At least once a day, I remind myself of my capabilities through my physical work and by questioning my pain in a logical way. I do so through a short meditation, which I mentioned, which involves diaphragmatic breathing also, that helps calm the nervous system physically. And log the work that you're doing for your pain. This can be through whatever means works best for you, but as I spoke about before, I use a calendar just to psychologically remind myself of the work that I'm putting in. And then finally, obviously limiting stress in other areas of your life. It's just always going to help. Cut back if you can and find the times to enjoy things, even if it's just for a small period of time a week. Something to look forward to has always been extremely handy. And just another one off the bat, just off the dome, not written down like the other ones. Sometimes if you can, just like changing something, like changing your routine, changing anything can sometimes produce, just because we get so entrenched in our routines, often the pain can be complementary to that. So for example, I go to work sometimes, and just before I go to work, the pain can be at its most because I might be a little anxious to go to work for that day. So sometimes just changing something. For example, I can go on a trip and come back and my pain can be either lessened or just sometimes different. And obviously you're doing different things when you're away, but just changing your environment can also get you out of that mentally and act as a bit of a reset. So obviously it's not plausible for everybody all the time to just be like, okay, I'm in a bit of pain, I'm going to do this or do that. But even just like on the weekend, I went away, and it can just make a huge difference to come back and sort of have like just be snapped out for a couple of days and realize that, like I said, the pain is so complementary, where maybe when your day to day doesn't look identical every single day, you know, it's the same way as like if you go to bed every night at 9 o'clock, you know, your eyes get tired at 8:30. And sometimes, in my experience, pain often works the same, where it's like it presents itself at, you know, 6:30 when you wake up. Then it kind of always does, until sometimes you snap out of whatever environment or routine you're in, and all of a sudden you realize the pain was also a part of that routine, and it is no longer there because you've changed that. Anyway, that's a bit of a ramble, but the point that I'm saying is sometimes changing your environment can also have a big difference, even though you're physically, mentally not really doing a whole lot. So they're my tips. Thank you for listening to me trudge through the first episode of this. I've tried to be concise, and I do feel like I've gotten a lot of what I say out. I'm hoping to get better at talking while doing these things, but yeah, this is also, like I've said multiple times during this, something that I'm continuously working on. I'm still in some degree of pain throughout most of my days, and I'm applying this knowledge at the same time as I'm also sort of, expelling it. And I don't mean to come across in a way of like telling people this is the way, but more so just reiterating that these are just the things that have been beneficial to me. I'm in a lot better of a level of pain than, say, 6 to 12 months ago. And that really does come down from making the difference in making an effort in learning these types of things. So this is just what's working for me. I'm also working through it. And I'm just hoping that while I'm also doing that, I could pass on any sort of knowledge that might also help other people. So good luck to everybody out there. If anyone has any other ways that they've found have been enormously helpful, like I'm all ears as well. I'm always trying to learn new things in not just this area, but all areas. So I'm not saying I've like cracked the code or anything, but these things can help, and I hope they do help, and all the best.